Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, from me, Richard Bewes, as we turn to the Bible. To Matthew's Gospel, chapter 28, the morning of the resurrection of the God-man, Jesus Christ. We'll start with verses 1 and 2. After the Sabbath, at dawn, on the first day of the week, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary went to look for the tomb. There was a violent earthquake, for an angel of the Lord came down from heaven, and going to the tomb, rolled back the stone and sat on it. Talk of shock waves. Yes, there had been an earthquake at the time of Jesus' death, just a page or two back, chapter 27, verse 51. And now, evidently, while these two women were making their way to Jesus' tomb, they could sense this further disturbance. The first earthquake, as Jesus died, was one of awe. A shudder ran through nature, wrote the converted Jew Alfred Edersheim. The second earthquake was one of exultant joy as death received its death blow. Emotions are very unstable when earth shakes. Two friends of mine, Bill and Joan Brown, were living in Hollywood during the Californian earthquake some years ago. They heard the alarms and the automobiles outside going off, and the whole house was heaving. Joan sat up in bed and began to pray to God. "Don't bother with that," yelled Bill. "He's much too busy to listen to you right now." Well, see, that's what an earthquake can do to your judgment. Joan grabbed all she could think of saving as she left the building and padded off into the road. It was only when she got outside that she found that all she was clutching onto was a tiny jar of anti-wrinkle cream. Well, here's Matthew 28. There's an earthquake around Jerusalem as the lightning-like angel brushes off all those elaborate precautions taken by the enemies of Jesus in their vain attempt to make the tomb sealed and secure and guarded. The guards get flattened, the tomb gets open, the way is cleared for the coming of those women who will be first witnesses of the Easter event. The fact is, you can't stop Jesus. I don't think we should be puzzled by the little differences of reporting by the four gospel writers. It's one angel in Matthew, but then two in Luke and John. Presumably Matthew is concentrating on the angel who was speaking. And then the time of day, at dawn, says Matthew. Just after sunrise, says Mark. Very early in the morning, writes Luke. While it was still dark, says John. Actually, the same thing happened at the famous Battle of Waterloo. When did it begin? Well, at 10 o'clock, said Wellington, the Duke of Wellington. 11:30, said General Alava. At 12, according to Napoleon and Drouet, his commander. At 1, said Marshal Ney. Basically, it depended on where you were standing as to how and when you saw the events unroll. So with regard to that morning of the resurrection, you only need a pencil and paper, really, for about half an hour with an open Bible, and all four accounts of what took place are completely reconcilable and consistent with each other. I've done it myself. Of course, it was a day of breathless excitement and of frantically running footsteps. It seems that one group of people would just miss another, as you sometimes see happening in performances on stage. It was that kind of a disorientating day, a very bewildering day, which explains verse 8 of our passage here, where we read that when the women hurried away from the tomb to tell the others, they were, it says, afraid, yet filled with joy. Something had happened that dramatically underlined as true everything that they had believed about Jesus. You can't stop Jesus. Or you can try. Everything seemed over during that Saturday of the weekend. Jesus, the troublemaker, was dead, tomb was sealed, the guard was posted, Christ's followers were scattered, the movement was over, and I can imagine the enemies of Jesus cheerfully watching the TV news and then going to bed. Then, at some point on the Sunday morning, something happens. The guards are flattened, the tomb is empty, the stone is rolled back, and shining angels have converted the tomb into a pulpit. He is not here, they tell the bewildered women in verse 6, and then as a mild rebuke, he has risen, just as he said he would. The forming of a new movement, the Jesus movement, the fellowship of the resurrection, began that Sunday. It doesn't look like much to begin with. It starts with the loyal remnant. 3 women, to be precise. Yes, it's 2 women in this passage, Mary Magdalene and Mary, the mother of James. It's Mark's Gospel that draws attention to a 3rd woman, Salome. And these women haven't come to anoint the body of Jesus. It's a second group of women who are going to come for that purpose. No, all this group has come for is just to look, just to be there. It's loyalty and love for Jesus that pulls them to that place. Why, on that crucifixion day on the Friday, they could hardly bring themselves to leave the place as darkness descended. It was Joseph of Arimathea, accompanied by Nicodemus, who had seen to the burial of the body of Jesus in Joseph's own new tomb. And then the 2 men went away. Matthew 27, verse 61 tells us that the women were left sitting opposite the tomb before they too had to go home. That's how Good Friday ends, with the 2 Marys, and that's how resurrection morning starts, with the 2 Marys. They're last at the cross, they're first at the tomb. We could say that this was their reward for their loyalty, to be the first witness, the first tiny instrument inserted into a solid mass of surrounding unbelief, opening up a crack in the prevailing worldview that was holding down a continent asleep in death. That little crack would be widened by other witnesses to prise open, an entire world. The loyal remnant, it starts there, last at the cross, first at the tomb. Just to be there. They weren't hoping for very much. And I say to someone, maybe a bit disillusioned with all this Christian stuff, with the Bible perhaps, and doubts and disappointment about the life of the church, stick around. Don't go away. Keep coming. Keep persevering. It's the faithful remnant, the people who hold on and persevere even when everything seems to turn sour, who will be rewarded when they happen to be on the spot when something quite remarkable takes place that changes everything. Let that dilapidated little group of women, then, be your model this day. So, in this passage, the world's advance of Christ's resurrection message starts with the loyal remnant. Secondly, it continues with what I call the futile resistance. I'm looking at verses 11 to 15, maybe especially at verse 12, as we look at the reaction of Christ's enemies. So I quote, "When the chief priests had met with the elders and devised a plan, they gave the soldiers a large sum of money, telling them, 'You are to say, his disciples came during the night and stole him away while we were asleep. If this report gets to the governor, we will satisfy him and keep you out of trouble.' So the soldiers, it says, took the money and did as they were instructed." The chief priests, people like myself who are caught up in the wonder of the resurrected Christ, feel like saying to those chief priests, you people still around? The story has moved on. Beyond you, the message is out. The tomb's empty. Jesus has been seen, and his distraught disciples have been completely changed. The message is taken off, and here you are now, left behind, fiddling around with bribes. You could have saved your money. It was a desperate attempt at damage limitation. Always money with those enemies of Jesus. They buy his betrayal with money. Now they're trying to do a cover-up with money. You can't stop Jesus with money. This was an example of futile resistance. Any belief system that tries to bribe people into compliance or to buy new recruits with financial and material benefits, in effect is saying, we have lost the argument. The chief priests were onto a very short-term approach. It wouldn't be long before they found themselves coughing in the exhaust of a new movement that had the world in its sights. This movement, you part of it? You part of it? It's more than a business, it's a person. That's where the whole secret lies. If it's the very Son of God who occupies the centre, then however small the beginnings, however fierce the resistance, you can't stop Jesus. The loyal remnant, the futile resistance. Thirdly and lastly, I see in this passage the Great Commission. In the days after the resurrection, Jesus was seen on different occasions and by different people. But even now, on this very first day of the resurrection, the angel was telling those women what to do. Verse 7, "Go quickly and tell his disciples, he has risen from the dead and is going ahead of you into Galilee. There you will see him." And then moments later, the risen Jesus himself confronts the women of our story. Verse 10, "Do not be afraid," he says. "Go and tell my brothers to go to Galilee. There they will see me." So that's where verse 16 takes us to, a mountain rendezvous in Galilee. The scattering of the disciples is over. The rushing of feet have steadied. A regrouping is taking place around the one person who can explain the miracle of the church that will never die, in spite of the venomous attempts of governments and antichrist figures to destroy it. Would you look at the great claim that this person makes there on the mountain? Look at verse 18. "All authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me." You see, in Jesus' earthly life, his authority was unparalleled over disease, leprosy, guilt, death, despair, demons. But all of that falls short of what is claimed in Matthew 28, verse 18. Nothing less than the divine government of the whole universe and of the kingdom of heaven has been given to the God-man, Jesus Christ. Look at the great mandate this person gives. Verse 19, "Go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit," all nations. Jesus is here committing the ultimate and eternal welfare of the whole human race to the care not of the generals or the monarchs or the dictators, but to his followers. By themselves, as individuals, they'd be lost before they'd done a thing, but under his authority, and banded together into a band of brothers and sisters, inspired and energized and united by the very Spirit of God in days to come, a tide was going to roll across islands and cities and whole continents, embracing indeed people of all nations. As Augustine in North Africa explained it 16 centuries ago, one loving spirit, he says, sets another on fire. And that in ones and twos that was going to happen across the whole world. What a claim, what a mandate, and what a pledge. "Surely," said Jesus, "I am with you always, to the very end of the age." And you know, a presence is always superior to a memory. Supposing the Lord had said, "The memory of my life and work will be with you always." No, it's better than that. To wake up every morning with your head coming off the pillow and saying quietly to yourself, "Another day of adventure on planet Earth, at the side and in the presence of the Lord who died for me and is now my ever-living daily companion right to the end." What a claim, all authority. What a mandate, all nations. What a pledge, all ways. So we began with the loyal remnant, some women, in the wake of an earthquake. We continued with the futile resistance of those who wear themselves out battering at Jesus. We advance, and we advance today, on the strength of the Great Commission, given on a mountain in Galilee some 2,000 years ago, and the tide is still rolling on. If Jesus Christ had not risen clearly and unequivocally as permanent conqueror of death on behalf of the whole human race, you and I would never have heard of him. The demoralized movement would have fizzled out on the launching pad. Why didn't it fizzle out? Some 2 billion of us and more around the world who share in Jesus the resurrection life, both now and for all eternity. Why, we know the answer: by his grace.